Well, good morning, guys. Behind me over my shoulder here is the next project we're going to start working on. A set of porch stairs and part of the porch. We're going to take a look at some of the problems that may have succumbed to this porch and some of the ways that we can build it a little bit better. And up here in Canada, it's almost a guarantee that stuff will just continue to rot. I know some people in the southern states, maybe save for termite issues, woodwork can last a long time. This structure here is, I believe, around 20 years old, and although it was built out of treated wood, it definitely has served to its last day. The stairs have already been demolished and removed, and a temporary guardrail was put up in place. And there's a set of side stairs there that's still serving for the purpose. So behind me is our lumber package. It came the other day on a high-ab equipped truck, and it's great dealing with a company that does quick orders, but also does quality orders. And it's worth your time to find a lumber yard that you can work with and one that you can bring your repeat business to, but they will also in turn look out for you. And I've been dealing with these guys now for probably around 15 years. They have always been a stand-up company. If there's ever been any issues, because nobody's perfect, there are issues from time to time, they fix them right away. One of the things that really makes a good lumber yard worth dealing with is if you can do things such as specify qualities to certain materials, and you'll know that they will sort and give you that quality you need. An example in this case is the 2x12s that we're going to use for stair stringers. Now, a stair stringer 2x12 that's not already pre-cut, one that we're going to cut ourselves, it has to be free from twist, voids, cracks, a lot of defects, because in the end we're cutting roughly half of that board away when we do each notch for our step. And if there is an underlying defect that runs through that other half, the stair stringer basically becomes worthless or unusable. So it's really nice knowing your lumber yard and being able to have confidence in them when you ask for certain boards to be picked for a certain quality, such as stringers, or especially if you're doing things like if you are doing 2x12 floor joists that are 20 feet long. It gets really expensive if you have to stop a job because you have issues. It's nice knowing that they can pick properly. So spend a little time, put a little bit of relationship effort in, and build a relationship with your lumber yard, and know that that you can trust them, and also they will come to know that number one, your money is good, number two, your word is good, and number three, you don't pester them with little things, but when you have a problem, it's a legitimate problem, and for that effect, or to that effect, they will get to you quite quickly. If your lumber yard isn't easy to deal with, or gives you rules such as whatever gets picked off the pile is what's picked and that's what you get, shop around, look for somebody different to deal with, because it really is worth your time to find someone that will back you up in your project. So demolition is something I've sort of always enjoyed from an analytical perspective. It can be really valuable to be able to look at how things have weathered over a decade or two. What has worked, what hasn't, what stayed tight, what has split, what has loosened up, what has deteriorated faster than it should have, etc. And this project is no different. So let's look at some of the good things that we can see here in the structure. Number one, they use pressure treated all throughout the structure. That's pretty much a must. Anything that is in direct weather like this, and especially in a wet climate like up here in Canada and many parts of Canada that are, it really is important to use a pressure treated material. The alternative is to use like a standard building grade SPF lumber, and to make sure you stain it or paint it on a regular basis. What tends to happen is that there are hidden sections which are often not painted because the staining or painting doesn't happen until later, and that becomes an area for rot to quickly happen. And I don't know how often I've seen it, that the hidden sections also tend to be structural in nature. And I think that's just the nature of physical connections. So if you are going to do a project like this, really consider spending a little extra, doing it at a pressure treat, and it'll last for a long time to come. Now, one of the good things that we see here is that they use stair hangers, and that is always a good thing, especially on an exterior application. With freeze thaw, summer drying out the wood, and the wood shrinks and contracts, it can happen such that stairs that are not hung off of steel hangers will start to loosen up. They'll start to draw away from the rim board a little bit. And it's not something that happens overnight, but after a few years, you notice the stairs start to get a little bit of a shake, a little bit of a wobble, and they go downhill from there. So having steel hangers is excellent. Okay, let's take a minute and cover some of the basics of pressure treated wood. Now, pressure treated wood has been around for quite a while, like over 75 years, and it originally was referred to as CCA. Now, CCA stands for chromium, copper, and arsenic, and those are the key elements that were initially used in the pressure treating process. A little while ago, as in approximately 15 to 20 years ago, there became an emergence of a new method, and it's called ACQ. And at least up here in Canada, it is now predominantly all pressure treated wood is ACQ. And ACQ essentially means an alkaline copper compound, and it is water-based. Now, it is better for the environment. It is better for human and animal health. However, it is also a lot more corrosive. So with the increased corrosiveness of ACQ, having compatible fasteners and pretty well anything that works with a pressure-treated wood system being compatible has become even more important. One of the main things that we have seen has been the predominant use of hot-dip galvanized components. Now, there are other ways we can protect against corrosion. We can also use powder coating in some applications. For example, aluminum railing balusters that you see that go into a pressure treated rail, those are usually powder coated. Aluminum by itself will corrode quite badly, but the powder coat prevents the corrosion from happening. Stainless steel is another way to prevent these corrosion problems. Sometimes in aesthetic situations, stainless steel will be used, but it is quite expensive. And the fourth way is ceramic coating. And ceramic coating is an excellent, very tough, but also very expensive way of protecting against corrosion problems and compatibility issues. And so we see ceramic coating, for example, on the green pressure treat compatible screws. That's an example of that there. This hanger is a good example of the corrosion that happens with pressure treated wood and metal. This hanger is actually hot dip galvanized and has been in use now for 15 to 20 years. And the outside part of it is fine. It has weathered without any issues. But the inside parts where the pressure treated wood is touching up against it, have corroded to the point where the zinc galvanized coating is now completely being eaten away, and it is starting to rust as normal steel. In another 10 years, probably, we would see the corrosion taking over the rest of the hanger on the inside. So using a hot dip galvanized hanger, it was a good thing to see on this stair build, the previous build. And using hot dip galvanized nails is also code compliant and is good to see. Now, just a comment about this. A lot of people in the sort of pro DIY boom that's been happening have been using screws, and I routinely see screws used in applications where they are not code compliant. So we want to be careful where we're using screws. Screws have excellent resistance to tear out. They can be great when used in decking applications, but we want to consider that screws are also quite brittle. Screws can snap quite easily, especially if over fastened. And screws, a common screw, like a common deck screw, when used against a metal hanger like this, can get into a situation where it is stretched and the head will snap off, or it'll snap in the shank area. You've probably seen this happen or had it happen to you before. What happens is that the screw continues to drive. So a person will overdrive the screw, and normally in an overdriven screw situation, the head starts to punch into the wood. It becomes a recessed head. But when used in a hanger, what happens is the screw will become elongated. The screw will be overdriven. The threads themselves will continue to pull the screw into the wood, but the head will no longer be able to drive in. It will not be able to countersink in, and it will stretch. And what will happen is it'll then snap. Screws are quite brittle. They're very hard, very sharp, but also quite brittle. And this is why we can't always use them in certain applications. Nails actually have good holding capability when used properly. In this case, using nails for decking is completely fine, but we want to use the hot dip galvanized nail, not just for compatibility, but also because the pull-out capacity is much higher with a hot dip galvanized nail. The hot dip galvanized nail is quite rough in comparison, and it really locks in the fibers of the wood, and it won't work its way back out. Whereas a common nail would not necessarily be a good use for decking or stair treads, because it will work its way out. The smooth, bright shank of a common nail, or the smooth, dark shank of a sinker, if you have like a phosphate coated nail, it will allow it to work out easier. One last note about galvanized nails is that not all galvanized nails are the same. You'll see some galvanized nails look quite shiny and smooth, even though they're called galvanized. And it is true they are galvanized, but they are electro-galvanized. They're not hot dip galvanized. And the corrosion resistance difference is supreme between a hot dip galvanized nail and an electro-galvanized nail. An electro-galvanized or plated nail is okay in an application where you might be putting it in and it may get wet once or twice, maybe during the construction phase. For example, roofing shingle nails can be electroplated. They don't have to be hot dip galvanized. However, in a situation like this, whenever we're dealing with pressure treated wood, we're going to be referred to a hot dip galvanized nail or a hot dip galvanized fastener or hanger. So whenever I say galvanized, just keep that in mind. Let's take a quick look at this corner here. We have a little bit of a jackpot of a situation going on here. The previous builder sort of probably was a DIYer or somebody who did not do maybe as much research and did not have the experience background as well. There's nothing wrong with DIYing. I love it. I think everybody should stretch their abilities, but do a little bit of research if it's not something that you're familiar with. In this case, one of the problems we see is that there's a filler block in here above this top tread, and that's a result of this stringer not being cut properly. The next thing that we see in here is that there's not actually any hardware holding this post in place. When we come to this side, we see that there's a hanger, but this hanger actually only supports this stringer. The post then is attached by nailing through the side of the stringer. Two things that are a problem with this. Number one is you should always use some sort of more permanent fastening with posts when they are not tied in somewhere else. So when they are tied in one location like this, see, this is a cropped post. It doesn't carry down further. So Well, in this case, we want to see a bracket, some strapping, carriage bolts, leg bolts, that type of things. By using more substantial hardware, that'll allow us to ensure that these posts are very rigidly mounted and they don't loosen over time. If we went to the top of this post right now, we would notice that there is some wiggle to it. And it's not because these fasteners have pulled out. They haven't at all. They have stayed tight. This joint is actually relatively tight, but there is just so much leverage on this post. And so without a carriage bolt or leg bolt or some sort of strapping, the post really is being asked to do something that it can't do. You want to try to avoid putting too many nails in too small of a location on your stringers. It's good that they stagger these nails. I have seen it happen where I have seen up to close to 20 nails used in one joint application like this. And what happened was that the post was never fastened properly to begin with. And as the post loosened, more nails were added. And what happened then is that the stringer started to split and the stringer started to become weak, which then made the stringer looser and the post looser, and it was a downward spiral until we were called to rebuild it. And at that point, we couldn't simply fix it. If we were called in the beginning, we could have added a bracket or some more substantial hardware and probably would have saved it. But as it was a complete rebuild. So we want to try to avoid that as well, so that we keep the integrity of our stair stringers in mind. The last thing that I'm not a big fan of here is that this is a cropped post. This post essentially ends. And then right here, we have another post in mind. And this post is toe-nailed in. There's no strapping, no brackets. It is always good to have continuous point loads whenever you can. So in this situation, it would have been a lot better if they designed this deck and railing system so that it was just one continuous post used here. It's not hard to do, requires a little bit of forethought, draw out a bit of a plan, or if it's something that you've done enough times and you sort of naturally look for this sort of thing. But keeping little ideas like that in mind can really help go a long way with having a stronger, more durable build at the end of when everything's said and done. Another limitation of pressure-treated wood that we sometimes run into is the fact that the entire member is not pressure-treated. It looks that way from the outside, but really, pressure-treated will go anywhere from only this deep up to maybe a 1/4 inch or so on the better applications. When you cut off the top of a post, you essentially expose all this wood that's not pressure-treated. So we want to make sure, at the very minimum, we apply a treating compound or a wood preservative afterwards. But more ideally, we want to cap this. And in this case, if they did a little bit of extra figuring, they could have capped this post with this handrail. And so that's something that we're going to incorporate into the new build. Looking at our stairs here, although there is a filler block up at the top, the stringers themselves are in good shape. The stringers were cut evenly, and there's not really anything wrong with these stairs. The homeowners would rather save a little money, and so we're going to keep these stairs. What we are going to change, however, is the railing system. This railing system is not code compliant. And talking about safety and code compliance, we also want to add some handrails to the inside of these stairs. This suffices as a guardrail to keep someone from going over the edge. But it's not a very good gripper. It's hard to grip this, especially in the winter time when snow and ice build up on this. So we're going to add a proper handrail, and that's just going to give a little extra safety while navigating these stairs in the winter time.